Friday at 5 p.m., the courthouse clock in Maple Ridge struck once, then again. Each chime curled into the marble hall like a dare. I could smell floor wax and wet wool from coats shaken out of the rain. A young lawyer in a navy suit stood across from me, with a manila folder tucked against his ribs as if it were a shield. Inside that folder was a deed with my name on it. My full name, Margaret Louise Reed, inked in blue in a neat foreign hand I did not own. I stared at that smooth, careful signature and could feel the old scar on my right index finger, a small, jagged crescent I got the day my husband and I hammered the first cedar plank into the walls of our lake cabin 40 years ago. That cabin smelled like coffee and pine sap and campfire, and it had my sweat in its nails. The paper said otherwise. My daughter wouldn't look at me. Her husband kept checking his watch. A clerk called our names. The lawyer cleared his throat. I tightened my fist until my knuckles stung and told myself the only honest thing in this building was that scar. I did not hold that pen. I did not sign that deed. And if I had to walk into a storm to prove it, then I would walk. 24 hours earlier, I was in my kitchen with cinnamon on my hands and radio static low, making a pan of sticky buns, because an old habit is a rope you can grab when you feel yourself fall. It was a Thursday that smelled like rain and car exhaust, and my loud little street on the south side of Maple Ridge had children tossing basketballs and a dog named Chico howling up the block. Retirement mornings run together if you let them. Mine do not. I planned them like lessons in my old cafeteria days. Breakfast at 8, walk at 9, call Nora by 10 to remind her to drink water, because women my age forget everything but the things that hurt. The voicemail came at 10:06. It had my daughter's voice on it. She sounded like she was trying to wrestle something large and slippery down into a small sentence.
Mom, call me. This is going to sound sudden, but we're listing the lake house. You don't even go up there anymore. We've got a buyer who's ready to pay above asking in cash. It's the smart move. Don't worry about the paperwork. I sorted it. We'll talk later. Sorted it. Those were the words. The cinnamon turned metallic in my mouth. The oven pinged, I turned it off and sat. Cinnamon glaze cooling like a frozen river. My first thought was not anger. It was a big open ache, like the sound you get when you hold a seashell to your ear and pretend the ocean is yours. The cabin was not a thing to list. The cabin was the place my husband, Frank, taught me that smoke smell can mark a life, where I learned the patient language of wood, where our daughter took her first steps on a rug with blue triangles, where the lake kept her secrets and returned them to us gentler. At 10:11, I called my neighbor, Nora. She used to be a bank officer before she moved to our little block with her husband, who died the spring the pears blossomed too early. Nora wears cardigans that look like someone cared enough to knit them slowly, and she keeps a voice that sounds like a flat stone under a stream, steady, even when you know the water is cold. I made you leave a pan of buns on my porch because last time you pretended you didn't want any, I said when she answered, because humor is a bridge you keep strong for when you need to cross. That's because last time I didn't want any, Nora said. What's wrong with your voice? Paula just called. They're listing the lake house. She said she sorted the paperwork. Silence, but useful silence. The kind that makes your own thoughts march straight instead of run. Come over, Nora said. 5 minutes later, my street's noises got smaller and her living room took me in. A crocheted throw, pictures of her grandsons in frames that didn't match, a plant with leaves like fat coins. I put my phone on her coffee table between 2 coasters from Myrtle Beach. She pressed her thumb against the screen and replayed the voicemail. Then she looked at me and saw the part I hadn't said. They can't list anything without your signature, she said. Do they have it? I didn't sign. Then someone did, or someone made the system believe you did. We should see what the county says. It is a particular relief when someone speaks your fear out loud. It makes the thing less mystical, more fixable. When Frank died, I learned that grief is less a wave and more a full-time job. You get up and show up even if you don't want to. This felt similar. I did not want to go to the county, so we put on our coats. Maple Ridge is the kind of place that gets photographed from magazines when the leaves go red, even though what makes it beautiful is mostly the smallness. Kids on bikes, a bakery where they know your order and your late husband's favorite, women in church basements labeling casseroles with masking tape. Town Hall sits on a hill like it forgot it was supposed to be imposing. Inside, a woman with a bun so tight it looked like it kept the whole building together, asked what she could do for us.
Recorded deeds, Nora said, for 1917 Cedar Path. Owner of record should be Margaret Reed. The clerk typed like someone who never wasted letters. Then she frowned at the screen. It shows a quit claim deed recorded last month, she said. Grantee is a North River Capital Holdings, LLC. Grantors, Margaret Reed and Paula Finch. I did not grant anything, I said. My voice did not shake. It did something worse. It went quiet. Can we see the instrument? Nora asked. The clerk printed it. Paper is harmless until it isn't. You know a wolf by the way it looks at you, and you know a lie by how clean it presents itself. The deed had a notary acknowledgement, a blue underline under my name that didn't quite get my loop right on the G. It wasn't how I write when I'm tired. It wasn't how I write when arthritis is good. It wasn't how I write at all. The notary seal belonged to a traveling closer named Gideon Hurley, commission expiring in October. The date was neat. The addresses were right. There was a line about consideration of $10 and for other good and valuable consideration. A line like a shrug. Nora leaned close. Do you see this? See how your R has a little backwards kick when you sign? This one's lazy. Someone copied your name off your driver's license, I'd bet. Does this look like your writing? I said, it looks like someone trying to make their hand behave. You should get a certified copy, Nora said to the clerk. And if you're willing, the notary's journal, if he filed anything in the county. We need his contact information, too. The clerk printed the certified copy. She wrote down the notary's number like she was pressing hard enough to leave a mark on the desk, as if force made truth. Walking out into the rain with a deed that said a thing I knew was false, I felt a calm I didn't trust. Some part of me had waited for this since Frank died. I don't mean I expected betrayal. I mean I expected to wake up one day and realize I'd spent decades building a life that other people saw as a pile of usable parts. Nora's Prius smelled faintly of lemon cleaner and eucalyptus gum. She handed me a napkin to wipe the rain off my glasses and waited until I was looking at her. Calls before fights. We call your daughter and ask where she got your signature.
When I called Paula, she answered on the second ring. She had her professional voice on, the one she uses when she wants the world to think she's less afraid than she is, the one I gave her by being too capable for too long. Mom, I was going to explain, she said right away, which is a sentence that rarely ends well. Mark's friend at North River can turn the cabin equity into cash, and we're paying off the float on the Asheville house, and we'll have a 12-month balloon, which is nothing because the buyer is ready. We need it to move fast. This gains you money. It's a win. You recorded a quitclaim with my signature on it, I said. How did you get it? There are hundreds of sounds in the world that tell you the state of a heart. The one Paula made then was someone tossing a coin down a deep well and pretending it wasn't theirs to catch. We had a traveling notary, she said. You remember the day I brought you that pharmacy refill? You signed a stack of documents with the insurance letter. It was in there. Mark said it was just consent. You know he handles most of the paperwork. You had me sign a deed without telling me it was a deed, or you had someone sign for me. Either way, you knew I didn't know what I was signing. Mom, please don't make it dramatic, she said. It's still yours. It's still our family's. It's just under a different arrangement for now, so we can breathe. Paula, I asked, what does a person who can breathe sound like when they call their mother? Because you don't sound like that.
She was quiet a long time. When she spoke, her voice was thin. We were drowning. North River was going to call the note. They said if we didn't bring 60 in by Friday, they'd take the duplex. The cabin is sitting there empty, and you don't even go up. This is a way to protect what matters. I listened to the rain. What matters, I said, and my mouth filled with the bitter taste of words that meant different things to different people. You will tell North River we dispute that deed. You will not listen to anything. I will see you tomorrow at the courthouse at 5 with whatever pure person at that office agrees to look me in my face when they called this forgery a misunderstanding. I can't undo a recording, she said. The sentence was friendly on its face and cruel in its bones. You'd be amazed what a judge can undo, I said, and Nora squeezed my wrist so hard I almost told her to stop, except I was grateful to know I still had blood there. After we hung up, Nora called the notary number. It went to a voicemail that sounded like a man leaving a message for himself. She left her name and the commission number and said we were requesting the journal entry for the day in question, which she named precisely like a nurse giving medicine at the right hour. We also need a lawyer, she said. I know a young one who isn't scared to be righteous, and I know a retired one who still wakes up looking for a fight. Which do you want? I want someone who says my name like it belongs to me, I said. Then we call Caleb Owens, she said. He does legal aid half days. He'll be at his desk until noon. After that, he's at juvenile court. Caleb's office has an industrial carpet that tries not to be depressing by being a color that isn't beige. He wore a tie with a stain near the knot and an expression that said he'd take the hit first if it put his client 2 inches ahead. He listened. He did not interrupt. He asked for the certified copy, scanned it on a gray machine that hummed like an old refrigerator, and read every line as if words were nails that either held or didn't. Ms. Reed, he said, we can do 2 things right now. 1, we file an affidavit of forgery with the Register of Deeds to put on the public record that you dispute the validity. 2, we file for a temporary restraining order and preliminary injunction to freeze any sale while we sort out whether this deed is valid. If anyone tries to record further conveyances, the flag should slow them down. We will ask the court for a declaratory judgment that the deed is void ab initio, never effective because your signature was procured by fraud or because it's not your signature at all. We'll subpoena the notary journal and video if there was one, and if the notary doesn't have the entry, that's its own problem for him. Meanwhile, if North River has started a trustee process on a deed of trust, we want to jam a wrench in that before it spins. Talk to me like I'm just a woman who baked for a living, I said softly. He smiled. If they used your name on paper to move your cabin without your okay, we ask a judge to stop them. Then we ask the judge to say the paper doesn't count. If the judge agrees, the cabin is still yours, like always. That I understand, I said. Bring anything with your signature, he said. Old checks, driver's license, anything with your hand on it. We might need a handwriting expert. Also, the notary, this Gideon, if he didn't personally witness your signature with you present, that's a statutory problem. Nora lifted her chin a little like a cat who hears a bird and won't admit she's excited. We're getting his journal, she said. Caleb filed papers with a speed that made me think of a short-order cook, his fingers doing the work they'd learned through 1,000 repetitions. He told us to meet him in the courthouse Friday at 5, when a judge tended to be both tired and also eager not to let something bad happen on his watch over the weekend. Then he told me to go home and drink water. Everyone was in a mood to hydrate me that day, like people assume older women forget their own throats. On the way out, my phone vibrated, a text from a number I didn't know. "This is North River Capital Collections. Per your recorded deed, you're on the note. We require cooperation to avoid harm to your daughter's real estate portfolio." I handed the phone to Nora. "That," she said, "is the kind of text people write when they count on their targets being too tired to fight." "I am tired," I said. She put her palm over mine. "You're allowed to be tired," she said. "You're not allowed to quit." That night, I drove to the cabin. I had not been in 6 months, and the guilt of that fact sat on the passenger seat like a relative who doesn't talk unless it's to remind you what you owe. The road to the lake climbs and dips like it hasn't decided which way happiness lives. The mountain laurel had gone brown around the edges from an early frost. The rain had stopped, but the air felt like a hand on my cheek. The gravel under my tires made a sound like old stories being read aloud. The cabin was where I left it, of course. Funny how your mind tells you to check. It leaned a little toward the cove, like it had to bend to hear the lake gossip. Frank had picked it with his stubborn kindness. "Not fancy," he'd said then, "but true." The back deck boards were silvered and soft. I put my key in the door and turned. The smell was the same. Coffee, damp wool, pine cleaner, my husband's ghost of Old Spice caught in the wood grain of the hall. There was a lockbox on the door handle that hadn't been there before. I touched it with the back of my fingers. It was cold. I wanted to tear the thing off with my hands, but Caleb's voice lived in my head already, so I took a picture of it, texted it to Nora and Caleb, and then because I owned the door, I went inside. I made coffee in the dented percolator that forgets sometimes how to stop. I sat at our small table and put the paper deed next to a picture of Frank holding a slat level to his eye. I put my driver's license beside them. My signature there looked like itself. The deeds version looked clean and wrong. Clean can be wrong, and messy can be true. That has been my experience in all matters of love and paint. If I tell you I slept well, I would be lying. What I did was blink in a darkness that had a heartbeat. I listened to water shift against the dock. I put my palm on the cedar wall where Frank had once leaned his sweaty forearm and laughed at a joke he wouldn't explain for 3 full minutes just to make me ask him to. I asked him for advice. He did not answer. The truth sat beside me anyway. I had to keep going. In the morning, the lake was a calm mirror with a bad secret beneath it. I drove back to town and found Nora on her porch, wearing a sweater that made her look like the best version of winter. She had news. "Gideon called," she said. "He said he remembers the older lady, but he doesn't have a journal entry. He said he did a remote notarization with your daughter present, and he thought it was fine because he saw a driver's license scan. He said he'd send me his screen capture." "You cannot notarize a deed by guessing at a person through glass and a scan," I said. "Not legally. The law is messy, but not that messy," Nora said. "Caleb says a bad notarization doesn't automatically make the deed void, but it helps the story of fraud. Also, North River filed a deed of trust. We need that restraining order today." At 2:30, we met in a small courtroom with a judge who had the eyes of a man who had lost a bet he shouldn't have made. He listened to Caleb's quick, clean request and looked at me over his glasses. "Do you understand what happens if I grant this?" he asked. It stops any sale until I hear more." "I understand," I said. My voice was not quiet this time. It did something new. It sounded like someone who had been a cafeteria manager for 30 years and knew how to feed 300 children on a budget without anyone noticing you had to make a miracle. It sounded like a woman who had built a porch with a man who made her laugh even when he was tired and mean, because love has a way of being both. It sounded like my own. The judge signed. The paper meant the weekend would belong to the truth, not to people who hurry damage before a court wakes up. We set a hearing for 5 the next day, because sometimes the world folds itself around a story that needs a little mercy. That night, Paula came to my house. She did not knock like a woman who deserved anything. She knocked like a girl who used to run up our front steps with elbows bruised from learning to skate. I let her in. She looked at my table and saw the stack: my license, the certified deed, the photo of the lockbox, and a Ziploc bag of old check carbon copies with my loops and slashes everywhere. "Mom," she said, "we didn't mean to hurt you." No one means to hurt until they do. Then they mean to explain. Her mouth trembled. She was too thin. Her hair looked expensive in a way I did not recognize as my child. She held herself like a person who had learned to be a decorative vase on someone else's mantle. North River is a friend of Mark's. They fronted him money on a project that stalled when the roofing company fell through. He signed something I didn't see. We got behind. They're not friendly when you get behind. He said the cabin was the easiest way to fix it quickly, and the buyer would make it all go away. He said you didn't use it. He said we'd buy it back later. If a man tells you the quickest way out of a bad deal is to reach behind you and steal from your mother, he is not your partner, I said. He is a man who knows what you will sacrifice to save him. She made a small sound and sat. "We had a notary," she said weakly. "You had a man with a scanner and a willingness to call a thing legal because he wanted to be home in time for dinner," I said. "I'm not pressing charges," I added, and her head lifted a fraction. "Why?" she asked, surprised. "Because I don't want to stand in court and call you criminal," I said. "I want a judge to call a piece of paper false. I want my cabin back, and I want you to learn what the word boundary tastes like when you say it out loud. That's enough justice for me." She covered her mouth with her hand. It made me want to cross the room and remove her hand so she could breathe. Instead, I stood where I was and asked a question I had not let myself ask since the voicemail. "Is Mark hurting you?" She looked at me like she almost answered on instinct. She chose something else. "He's persuasive," she said, another word women use when they don't want to say the true one. "He says money is a game for people brave enough to put their feelings in a drawer. That's what men who expect you to be their drawer say. I hope one day you stop folding yourself to fit." She left with her coat half zipped and her eyes full of the child she was and the woman she could be. I slept 2 hours and watched the ceiling the rest. Friday, the courthouse lobby had that Friday smell. Coffee, anxiety, a hint of cleaning fluid. North River sent a lawyer who was younger than my grandson would be if I had one. He had a haircut that probably cost more than a month of my power bill. Mark came in late wearing a shirt that said he wanted to be mistaken for a certain kind of success. Paula sat on a bench with her hands folded so tight I could see the small bones by her thumb. If I tell you I slept well, I would be lying. What I did was blink in a darkness that had a heartbeat. I listened to water shift against the dock. I put my palm on the cedar wall where Frank had once leaned his sweaty forearm and laughed at a joke he wouldn't explain for 3 full minutes just to make me ask him to. I asked him for advice. He did not answer. The truth sat beside me anyway. I had to keep going. In the morning, the lake was a calm mirror with a bad secret beneath it. I drove back to town and found Nora on her porch, wearing a sweater that made her look like the best version of winter. She had news. "Gideon called," she said. "He said he remembers the older lady, but he doesn't have a journal entry. He said he did a remote notarization with your daughter present, and he thought it was fine because he saw a driver's license scan. He said he'd send me his screen capture." "You cannot notarize a deed by guessing at a person through glass and a scan," I said. "Not legally. The law is messy, but not that messy," Nora said. "Caleb says a bad notarization doesn't automatically make the deed void, but it helps the story of fraud. Also, North River filed a deed of trust. We need that restraining order today." At 2:30, we met in a small courtroom with a judge who had the eyes of a man who had lost a bet he shouldn't have made. He listened to Caleb's quick, clean request and looked at me over his glasses.
Caleb greeted us like we were meeting at a picnic and then leaned in. "We asked for this to be on the record," he whispered. "We will offer them an out, rescind their deed of trust and any claim tied to that quitclaim in exchange for us not pursuing sanctions against their notary and not moving to enjoin broader practices. If they decline, we go in there and let the judge tear this apart line by line. Either way, you walk out owning your cabin." When they called our case, the young lawyer placed the neat manila folder on the table like a sacrifice that might still be changed to a lesser offering. Caleb spoke first. He talked about consent and its absence. He talked about notaries and their obligations. He talked about how deeds may be public records, but they are not magic. They do not conjure ownership without the owner's will. Then the young lawyer stood. He had the careful confidence of someone still learning which words to use when his client is wrong. He said phrases like family transaction and intra-family understanding and equitable conversion. He said the cabin had sat unused. He said the money would benefit the family. He said, and here my heart did a strange little hop like a fish in shallow water, that Paula had indeed consented to sign for me in a stack of documents during a casual visit, and that the notary had seen a photo of my license, which was sufficient. "Counsel, approach," the judge said. They did. He looked at me then. "Ms. Reed, you understand all of this is less about family and more about ink and rules." "I do. I also understand that ink and rules exist to keep people from using the word family as a knife." He nodded once, like a man who keeps a small category in his brain for sentences he intends to remember later. Caleb asked to call me, and the judge allowed it. I sat in a chair with the microphone that smells like everyone's breath and told the truth so simply it felt like washing a dish clean enough to put it back in the cabinet. I held up my driver's license and my old check carbons. I pointed to the loop on my R, the small sharp slash on my T, the way my M gets tired in its last leg because of the arthritis. I showed them the deed's smooth violence. I said I did not meet a notary. I did not hold a pen for this transaction. I would not have given this cabin away in a world where my husband still visits me in the creak of the porch stair. Then Caleb called Nora. She testified like a woman making a bed, efficient, exact, every corner tucked. She read the notary statute. She recounted the voicemail from Gideon. She introduced the screen capture he sent that morning with a pixelated rectangle of my driver's license and the corner of Paula's kitchen table. No journal, no signature in front of the notary. A man watching a square and calling it a room. When it was Mark's turn, he put his palm on the Bible and looked like a man who had practiced his lines in his car visor mirror. He told a story about leverage and opportunity cost. He used the word portfolio 4 times in 2 minutes. When Caleb asked if he had taken out a hard money loan at 22% interest and whether North River had the right to confess judgment in the event of default, he said, "My lawyer has that." "Does your lawyer have the truth?" Caleb asked, mild as milk. The judge put his glasses back on and took them off again, which is how you can tell a courtroom is about to stop pretending this is maybe fine. "Counsel," the judge said to the young man, "if I conclude the notarization was improper and the grantor did not give informed consent, the deed is void. You are playing with dynamite in a paper bag."
The young lawyer touched his client's arm. They huddled. They asked for a recess. The judge gave them 10 minutes. In those 10 minutes, I watched Paula stare at a light fixture as if it held a map. Then I watched her look at me and widen her eyes the way she did when she was 5 and had done a thing wrong, but needed me to know she was still a good child. My heart made room for 2 truths. She had been part of my harm, and she was not built to harm. Sometimes those truths live in the same person for a long time before one finally moves out. When we reconvened, the young lawyer said words like mutual rescission and without admission of wrongdoing. He said North River would release its deed of trust and file nothing further, and they would accept the court's declaration that the quitclaim deed was void so long as my side agreed not to seek sanctions against the notary or attorney's fees for today's hearing. Caleb glanced at me. I looked at my hands. I looked at Paula. I looked at the judge. I thought of Frank's scar on my finger. I nodded. "Accepted," Caleb said. The judge leaned forward. "Miss Reed," he said, "you keep your cabin. Counsel, file your filings. Miss Finch, Mr. Finch," he turned to my daughter and her husband, "be careful how you treat the word family. Court is adjourned." The gavel sound was smaller than television actors make it. It didn't matter. It still shook something loose that had been stuck in me since Thursday at 10:06. Out in the hall, Mark tried to put his hand on Paula's back to steer her like she was something with wheels. She moved sideways. He looked at me with a smile that had no humor and said, "You didn't need to make a show." I didn't make a show. I made a boundary. He laughed, a sound like a coin dropped on a bar. He walked away without touching my daughter again. It is a small mercy when men remove their hands of their own accord. Paula and I stood together and did not pretend. "I'm sorry," she said. "I'm really, really sorry. I was scared." "I know. Fear makes a map that only shows the fast roads. The slow ones are where your life is."
She cried, not dramatic, not theatrical, just 2 slow tears that made a path across the face I kissed 1,000 times when she was small. I did not reach to wipe them. I let her have them. They belonged to her. "Come by Sunday," I said quietly. "Bring nothing but yourself. No lawyer words, no plans. We'll sit by the lake and you can tell me the parts you've been hiding from. Or you can say nothing and just look. Either is fine." She nodded. Then she nodded again, as if she were trying to agree with herself as much as with me. I drove straight to the cabin because being near the cedar walls felt like a way to thank them for holding while I was gone. The sunset made the lake look like a penny rubbed with thumbs. Ducks trailed commas across the surface. I sat on the steps and waited for my breathing to catch up to my chest. When it did, I went inside, pulled the old receipt tin out from under the sink, and took out the spiral notebook where Frank had kept notes about where he found cheap nails and which gas station sold bait that wasn't mostly sawdust. tucked in the back, I found the thing I didn't know I needed until I had it in my hand. A card in Frank's handwriting, a recipe for Brunswick stew, with his pencil marks arguing with my pen marks in the margins. You can tell the health of a marriage by the way people argue taste in soup. On Saturday morning, Nora arrived with a thermos and a bag of groceries. I brought onion, green pepper, canned tomatoes, butter, corn, a chicken if you want to get fancy, she said, as if this were ordinary. Maybe it was. Maybe ordinary is the most miraculous thing we have. Do you remember, she asked later, when the stew bubbled and the kitchen smelled like a plan, how you always said you wanted to run a kitchen at a summer camp when you retired, feed people real food, teach the kids how to hold a knife so they weren't scared of it?
I said that? I asked, folding my arms and trying to remember the me who said things like that. You did, she said. What if this cabin is the camp? Not the canoe and whistle kind, the community kind. There are widows on our street who've been eating cereal for dinner since their husbands died. There are grandmothers raising kids who would cry if they tasted a tomato that didn't come sliced in plastic. Who pays? I asked, because a kitchen is a math problem. I have a widow's checkbook, she said. You have a retired cook's stubbornness. Churches have ladies who will bake if you even glance at them. The high school has teens who need service hours. The credit union will sponsor if you put a plaque up. Caleb eats food. He knows people. We call it Frank's table or Margaret's porch. You pick. We do one Sunday supper a month until you're braver. I looked at the big table under the window where the morning light lands like God forgot to close the blinds. I thought about women at that table telling each other things they shouldn't have had to live through and laughing anyway. I thought about kids learning you can make broth out of bones and patience in the parts of a vegetable that aren't pretty. Frank's table, I said. He'd like that. He always wanted more chairs than we had people to fill them. We put the idea in the air like a bird you're not sure will fly and watched it flap, then soar. Nora wrote a list. I taped it on the wall. I put my hand on it and felt my pulse push against the paper. Sunday, Paula came. She wore a sweatshirt and shoes that could run if running got called for. She sat on the deck with her knees up like she did when she was 16 and thought the lake understood her better than we did. For a long time we said nothing. Silence is a language, and I wanted her to speak it like a native again. Mark says I humiliated him, she said finally.
Mark is humiliated by boundaries, I said. Do you think I'm bad? She asked, and the child pulled tight inside the woman startled me with her courage. I think you're a person who got lost on a fast road, I said. The map is slower than you want. It's still there. I'm thinking about leaving, she said. He doesn't hit me. It's not that. I don't see myself in my own mirrors anymore. Does that count as a reason? Yes, I said. Yes, it does. She cried again. This time I did wipe her tears. Not because she needed me to, but because I wanted to. Then I made her eat stew and sent her home with containers labeled in tape. Love, for me, has always looked like stacked Tupperware. The next weeks came in pieces, a quilt of small, tight stitches. North River filed their release. The county expunged the deed like it had been a rumor. A letter came from me from Gideon, the notary, with an apology that read like something his insurance company approved. I put it in a drawer with things that don't matter anymore. Paula texted me that she'd booked a session with a therapist and had moved into the spare room for a while. I mailed her my scaled recipe for banana bread and a note that said, in 3 lines, bananas go in dark and unlovely, bread comes out warm and honest. You are allowed to be fruit. Not all transformation is pretty. We launched Frank's Table in April, the month the Dogwoods decide to surprise you even though you live here and know their schedule like your own heartbeat. Word went around the block and then around town. The sign was a piece of barnwood with the name painted in the good white I use for trim.
The first night, 16 people came. Then 2 more wandered in when the smell made them suspicious of their own dinners. I kept my hands in onions and butter and the kind of tasks that make sense when other things don't. I taught a girl named Maribel to hold the knife with her fingers tucked. She cut carrots like a pianist learning scales. Nora ran the dish line like God was on her schedule. A man who had lost his wife last winter sat under the window and told me how she used to make a thing called spoon bread and how he never watched to learn. We laughed until we didn't. Then we ate. Community turns fear into food. That was the lesson. It isn't new, but it felt new to me. Every time someone left with a foil packet and the promise to come back with news of how much salt was enough, I felt a small, quiet victory I had not felt since Frank's last good day. Summer came like it always does, bold, sweaty, noisy. We opened the windows and the cabin smelled like sunscreen and tomato vines and a kind of happiness that doesn't pretend not to be tired. We did a fish fry one Sunday. We did cobbler and ice cream another. A woman from the bank called to say their community grant could pay for a new refrigerator if we put their name on a little plaque. "We'll put your name on a napkin if you bring napkins," Nora said into my phone, and the banker laughed and sent money anyway. In August, Paula asked if she could help on a Sunday. I said yes, and then sat with the yes until it didn't scare me. She showed up in sandals and tied her hair back with a dish towel like I'd taught her when she was 9 and insisted on making scrambled eggs for breakfast every day for a week. She chopped onions badly and I fixed her cut, and we worked in a rhythm that felt not like forgiveness, but like something you build on the way to it. She told me she'd filed for divorce. She told me she was scared and also not. She told me she had met a woman in group therapy who taught her to say the words, "This is mine," when she pointed to her own life.
"This is mine," she said shyly, pointing to a bowl of coleslaw like it meant something bigger. It did. In October, the leaves decided they'd had enough of being green. On the day the 2 maples by the porch turned the color of a fox's tail, a letter came from the court with a formal certificate that said the quitclaim had been declared void. I framed it and hung it in the hallway between Frank's hammer and the picture of the day the cabin got its roof, not because I needed a government to tell me what I already knew, but because it mattered to me that the same building that tried to take something from me also gave something back. That same afternoon, after the supper dishes got stacked, Nora and I sat on the stairs and listened to the lake decide whether to be loud or subtle. I took out the card with Frank's stew recipe and traced his handwriting with my finger. "I didn't think I'd have a big new story this late," I said. "You didn't," Nora said. "You just remembered an old story you own." A few weeks later, Paula brought me a folded piece of paper that looked like it had lived in her purse too long. It was a letter she'd written to her future self in therapy. She didn't ask me to read it. She put it on the table. I read it anyway, because I am her mother. It said, "I am allowed to choose slow maps. I am allowed to be loved and not used. I am allowed to return keys I never owed. The lake is not a thing to sell. It is a thing that keeps my mother whole." She had underlined that last sentence twice. I put the letter back in her hands. She smiled a small smile I had not seen since she was 10 and had learned to make biscuits that rose. There is nothing better than the expression of a person who just recognized herself in her own face. Winter settled in. The cabin breezed. The porch boards made their small complaint sounds. The heater clanked until a church friend came to bleed the radiator and fixed it with nothing but a screwdriver and a joke. We kept doing Sunday suppers with fewer salads and more stews. Old men taught young boys how to whittle kindling on the steps. Nothing went viral. Everything mattered.
In February, I got a card in the mail with a drawing of a kettle on it. Inside, a girl wrote that she had eaten at Frank's table twice and had gone home and cooked for her mother for the first time ever, and now they did it every Thursday. And did I know that one small room could change so many big things? I did not cry right then. I waited until I was in bed and the heater had made its last clank and the lake was as quiet as an honest breath. Then I cried the kind of tears that wash, not the kind that flood. There's a difference. In the spring, the community college asked if I would teach a kitchen basics class for adults starting over. I said yes and wrote a curriculum with numbered steps and large fonts and jokes in the margins because grown people trying a new thing deserve to laugh as much as children do. Paula came to help sometimes. She showed a woman how to use a measuring cup without feeling like a math test. She showed me how to rest when resting would serve the sauce better than stirring. That summer, we held an anniversary supper. We called it 1 year at the table because names matter when you tell a thing back to yourself. People brought what they had, a pie, a fork, a story about a brother who made it home safe, an apology, a plan. Nora wore a sweater too warm for the weather because her favorite color is stubborn. I stood on the step and said too many words, and no one minded because sometimes old ladies have to say all of it before they can eat. After we cleared the tables and shooed away the men who always think lifting chairs makes them excused from doing dishes, I walked down to the dock alone. The lake wore the last light like a shawl. I held the cabin key in my palm and thought of all the hands that had held it, mine, Frank's, the notary's digital imagination, the clerk at the register, Paula's, even when she didn't understand what it weighed. It was cool and heavy and ordinary. I put it back on my ring. Before I drove home that night, I sat at the table with the window open and wrote a note to myself. It said, "I am 70 now. I do not have to earn my right to peace by letting someone wound me first. I have money in my account and a key that belongs to me and a friend who will show up with onion and butter because she knows what grief eats. I have a daughter learning to be a person in her own mirrors. I have a lake that forgave me for staying away because sometimes people do not visit the places they love while they are busy pretending they do not deserve them. I will not sell my life to fix someone else's storm again. If I am called selfish for doing so, I will say yes and let the word grate into something smooth." I folded the note and tucked it inside the cookbook with Frank's recipe, next to a grease stain that looked like Alabama. I turned off the lamp. I locked the door. On the way back to town, the radio played a song about long roads and second chances. It was corny. I sang it anyway. I drove slow because the deer like to surprise you at night out here, and I had learned that you cannot hurry your way into safety. You build it. You grease its hinges. You invite it to supper. You sit it at a table and feed it stew. Months later, on a Tuesday, when the breeze made a sound like library pages turning, Paula and I took a walk around the lake. We did not talk about Mark. We did not talk about what she should do next. We talked about the good tomatoes at the farmer's market if you go early enough, and the way the church choir always speeds up on the last verse, and whether we should plant herbs on the sill so the room always smells like something living. "Mom," she said as we turned toward the cabin, which is the kind of thing I could have done with my eyes closed. "I keep wanting to say I'm sorry again," she said, "and I know you heard me the first time, but I also want to say thank you for choosing to fight for yourself even when it could have broken us. If you hadn't taken that stand, I'd still be drowning." "I didn't take a stand to teach you a lesson," I said. "I took it so I could live. You learned because you're watching. That's how I learned to be brave, from women who refuse to let other people name their lives." We walked. The sun put its honey on everything. Down on the dock, a girl practiced casting a fishing line without hooking her brother. On the porch, Nora had already opened the windows and laid out the good napkins because she cannot abide paper if she can help it. Inside, the kitchen waited, and the cabin breezed, and the stew cot reminded me that the best food starts as separate things and becomes one thing by trusting the heat. On my birthday this year, I woke up early and made coffee the way Frank liked it, too strong for normal mornings. Perfect for beginnings. I took my mug to the window and looked out at the lake doing its slow work. The phone buzzed with messages. I smiled at each and then put it face down. I sat at my table and listened to the quiet hum of a room that belonged to me. I thought about the courthouse at 5 o'clock that Friday, about a young lawyer who learned a new respect for old ladies, about a judge who found a sentence to tuck in his brain for later, about the sound a gavel makes when it decides toward mercy. I thought about Paula's letter to herself. I thought about Nora's list on the wall with greasy fingerprints now because people touch the things that matter. I thought about the way boundary and love can sit side by side at a table without fighting if you set enough places and pass the bread twice. I am not extraordinary. I am a woman who did her job, raised her child, buried her husband, and chose not to let a smooth signature take a whole life from her. That is all. And that is not small. When I put the key in my pocket and tie on the apron that still smells like last night's onions, I am not brave, I am busy. The doors will open in an hour. Frank's table will fill up with people who think they came for stew and will leave with something else they do not have a name for yet. We will eat. We will laugh. We will make a little economy of good. The lake will watch, the cabin will listen, I will stand at the stove and stir, and the line of my arm will be as steady as it needs to be. When I glance up, my daughter will be by the window, hands wrist deep in a bowl of potatoes, smiling like someone who found herself exactly where she is. It should not be remarkable to say, at 70, that your life is yours, but it is remarkable to feel it, to feel the floor solid under your feet, to feel the paper that tried to make you smaller crumble into a drawer with other irrelevancies, to feel a room filled with people who bring you their hunger and their jokes and their grief and their willingness to wash pots when the sink's too full, to feel keys in your pocket that do nothing but open your own doors. Friday at 5 p.m., there will be other hearings. Other signatures will try to lie. Other women will sit on hard benches and wonder if they are crazy to think that their lives are their own. I hope they look down and find the small scar on a finger, or the grease stain on a recipe card, or the neighbor's hand on their wrist, and I hope they tell themselves the only honest thing. You did not hold that pen. You are allowed to say no. You are allowed to say yes to yourself. You are allowed to pick up your key and build something with it that makes the air smell like dinner and rescuing home. And when the courthouse clock chimes, when the sound curls into those marble halls and dares everyone to remember who they are, I hope they stand the way I did. And if their voice trembles, I hope their hands stay still. And when they walk out under the big doors into the rain, I hope the first breath they take is easy. Because the map is slow, and slow is how you win.